Howdy folks, and welcome back to Pastor Paul's Daily Devotional. You're here, I'm here, let's do this. So we're continuing this week by looking together at Ephesians chapter 6 verses 5 through 9, in which the Apostle Paul addresses both slaves and slave masters, or slave owners, as part of his household codes. And so we need to talk about the context of slavery in the U.S., we need to talk about it in the first century before we actually jump into the text. So yesterday we talked about slavery being a sin. All Christians that participated in it participated in a great tragic sin. And even those that were complicit or benefited from it but didn't directly own slaves, that was sin. But then we also made the second point that many Christians, due to their faith in Jesus Christ, were also strong abolitionists. And so you have people like William Wilberforce and the Friends or Quakers, in the late 1600s, early 1700s here in the Rhode Island, New England area that fought to abolish the slave trade. And so, we need to balance what we say. Now, points 3, 4, and 5 are talking about slavery in the ancient world in Paul's context because they're not identical, okay? There's our context, understanding slavery in the West, then there's the context of understanding slavery in the ancient Greco-Roman world. So point number 3, slavery was common in the ancient world. It was common in the ancient world. The scholar William Westerman, who taught at Columbia University for 25 years, has said this. He says, quote, "The institution of slavery was a fact of Mediterranean economic life, so completely accepted as a part of the labor structure of the time that one cannot correctly speak of the slave problem in antiquity." So he says this was just a fact of life. No one would have challenged it. Because it was just part of the warp and woof of the social culture and the economic culture in Paul's day when he was writing the letter to the Ephesians. Now, point number 4, slavery in the ancient world was not identical to the race-based chattel slavery in the West. It was not identical. Slavery in the first century had all kinds of people. There was domestic servants, there was manual laborers, there was the educated class, there were slaves who were doctors, there were slaves who were teachers, there were slaves who were administrators, so forth and so on. And it was the scholar Andrew Lincoln who writes that most slaves in the Greco-Roman world actually had better conditions than many free men. There were many slaves that had better economic and living conditions than free laborers. And the reason being is that there were many household slaves that were considered part of the house. They were considered part of the family, and they were treated differently than laborers who were just trying to scratch by out in the larger world. In addition to that, we know that there were many, depending on the time and the place, that could sell themselves into slavery. It wasn't race-based. There was all kinds of slaves in Greco-Roman society, and again, I'm teaching in general principles here. But in Greco-Roman society, there were some that were conquered peoples. There were some that sold themselves into slavery to pay off debts. There were some that did it as an economic advantage to learn a trade, to buy their freedom, which was called manumission, and then to go out and be more successful than their master. And that's why one historian has said that basically, quote, many times the former slave became wealthier than his patron. In addition to that, when Paul was writing, the Roman Empire was actually starting to release slaves. In fact, between 81 and 49 BC, the Roman Empire freed 500,000 slaves, and they were providing additional legal protections for slaves. So the situation, 100 BC up to 100 AD, it was improving as it relates to slaves. Number 5, Christianity did not attack slavery directly, but indirectly. And so Christians didn't have the social capital to dismantle slavery as a persecuted minority. However, over time, as Christianity grew, and it spread throughout the empire. One of the reasons it grew is because it taught social equality, that everybody, men and women, slaves and free people, everyone is free, or everyone is equal, we should say, in God's sight. Everyone is completely equal in God's sight, equal of dignity, value, and worth. And so through Christianity, as John Stott has pointed out, God used Christianity to, quote, be a fuse which at long last it lit a fuse, Christianity did, which at long last led to the explosion which destroyed slavery. All right, tomorrow we're going to jump into the text. Thanks for listening. I hope you see the differences, and God bless.